The night jungle exploded with orange fire as an SOS flare tore through the canopy. 8 SEALs, out of ammo and bleeding into the mud, had sent their final cry for rescue. But no helicopter came. No angels dropped from the sky. Instead, something moved in the shadows. A figure they had dismissed as irrelevant. The quiet observer who never carried a rifle, never spoke unless asked. Yet in that moment, when death closed in, she vanished into the trees. What followed were 5 impossible shots, each echoing like judgment from the dark. 5 mercenaries dropped. Silence consumed the kill zone, and the question burned hotter than the flare itself. Who was Specter Nine, and why did 5 bullets rewrite everything they thought they knew? The Pacific night was heavy, the kind of heat that clung to skin and weighed on every breath. The Zodiac's rubber hull whispered against black water, carrying 8 SEALs toward a shoreline that looked more like a wall of green shadow than any place human. The only sounds were the faint hiss of water against rubber and the quiet hum of the outboard running at idle. Insertion was meant to be silent, surgical. Every man in that boat had done this countless times, yet that night something in the air felt different, thicker, watchful. At the tiller, Lieutenant Cade Monroe kept his profile low, scanning the seam where surf met stone. He didn't trust the quiet. The Pacific could roar when it wanted to, but tonight it held its breath. 200 meters to the beach, his point man whispered, "Break in the rocks ahead. Sand looks clean." Monroe gave a curt nod and signaled the formation plan. 2 men up to the tree line, 2 to hold the beach, the rest to follow once they were sure it was cold. And then there was her. At the stern, half hidden in the dark, sat the observer no one had asked for, Ilara Voss. The mission brief had listed her as Joint Reconnaissance Communications Evaluator. Officially, she was there in an observer capacity, meant to document and analyze the operation for higher command. No rifle, no heavy kit, just a compact rucksack and a regulation sidearm she hadn't even unholstered during pre-mission checks. The SEALs had looked her over once at launch and quietly nicknamed her Specter Nine. Part joke, part dismissal. She looked like she belonged in a staff meeting, not in the bowels of a jungle where mistakes were paid for in blood. Monroe had shaken her hand hours earlier. Her grip was firm, professional, but it lingered only the regulation 2 seconds. No smile, no small talk. Just pale eyes that measured him the way a surveyor measures distances, without warmth, without judgment, simply calculating. When he asked for her name, she gave it flatly. Observer 9. No elaboration, no invitation for conversation. Now in the boat, Monroe gave her instructions without turning his head. You stay on my hip once we reach shore. No freelancing. No wandering off to take notes. You see something that doesn't look right. You call it out immediately. Her answer came level, stripped of all emotion. Understood. That was all. No extra syllables. No hesitation. The Zodiac slid onto wet sand, and in practiced silence the team moved. Boots in shin-deep surf. Rucksacks thrown over shoulders. Rifles checked and ready. In less than 2 minutes, they were above the tide line, hauling the Zodiac into cover beneath overhanging brush. The jungle loomed ahead, a fortress of tangled roots and choking vines. Monroe's men spread into formation, wedge, 50-meter intervals. Sanchez on point, Collins and Chu covering the flanks, Monroe himself in the middle, and behind him the ghost-like presence of Ilara Voss, moving without complaint, without wasted motion. She carried only her pack and a small equipment case strapped between her shoulders. No sniper rifle, no optics. Nothing that said combat. And yet Monroe noticed something curious. She didn't stumble. Where vines snagged his men's gear, she slipped through cleanly. Where roots threatened to twist ankles, she seemed to know exactly where to place her boots. Light on her feet, unbothered by the jungle's attempt to trip her, she moved as though she'd walked this terrain 100 times before. Collins dropped back beside Monroe, whispering with a half-smirk, "Sir, our observer doesn't even have a real weapon. Makes you wonder what kind of evaluating she's planning to do." Monroe kept his eyes forward. Keep your focus on your sector. But privately, he was wondering the same thing. This is where arrogance takes root. Non-combat personnel, analysts, medics, observers, are often dismissed by frontline operators. If you don't carry a rifle, you're seen as baggage. To the SEALs, Ilara Voss was exactly that. To Monroe, an unwanted distraction. But soon she would prove deadlier than any of them. Because the jungle wasn't waiting, it was watching. It was... The jungle was never silent, not in Monroe's memory. Healthy jungle buzzed with insects, croaked with frogs, and whispered with the movements of creatures small and large. But tonight the green walls pressed in, unnaturally quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt staged, a performance meant to lull the careless. Petty Officer Chu, eyes glued to his thermal monocular, paused near a limestone outcropping. Cold, he muttered, meaning no visible heat signatures ahead. To the SEALs, that was reassurance. To Monroe, it felt wrong. The ground itself seemed too neat, too carefully brushed of natural clutter. And it was then that Ilara Voss spoke for the first time since stepping off the Zodiac. "This trail has been prepared," she said evenly, her voice carrying just far enough for all to hear. "Leaf scatter is too uniform. Soil's been disturbed in the last 48 hours. Someone wanted this path to look natural, but it isn't." The men froze, glancing at each other. Sanchez, always quick with a smirk, raised a brow. "You can tell all that from some dirt?" Ilara didn't flinch. "Tire tracks run east to west, but natural water flow here runs north to south. That means the marks were placed deliberately. Look at the leaf pattern. It's staged, not fallen. This is textbook preparation for an L-shaped ambush. If you walk this line, you'll be exactly where they want you." Collins snorted softly. "Didn't know they taught fortune-telling at headquarters." Her eyes flicked toward him, pale and steady. "They don't. They teach reconnaissance." Monroe caught himself studying her face. There was no arrogance in her tone, no defensiveness, only certainty. The kind of certainty that came from experience, and that was what unsettled him most. Still, the habits of command held him in place. Orders had been clear: verify the weapons cache, report, and extract. No heroics, no detours. To acknowledge her warning meant changing the mission plan based on the word of someone the team didn't even consider a combatant. "Duly noted," Monroe said curtly. He gave the signal to keep moving. The line advanced, boots sinking into soil that felt soft, wrong. Ilara moved behind Monroe, silent as a shadow, her eyes scanning every vine and ridge, as though the jungle were whispering secrets only she could hear. The skepticism among the SEALs. Skepticism hardened into dismissal. Sanchez leaned close to Collins as they skirted a root system. "She's here to take notes and file reports? Now she's lecturing us about ambush theory?" Collins chuckled under his breath. "Desk jockeys always think they see patterns. Out here, you keep moving and trust the guy in front of you. Dirt doesn't win firefights." It was the voice of culture speaking, the ingrained belief that those who didn't shoulder rifles didn't earn the right to interpret threats. To them, her analysis was noise, background chatter best ignored until the bullets started flying. But Monroe couldn't dismiss it so easily. He'd led patrols from South America to the Balkans, and his instincts screamed that she was right. The jungle was too curated, the quiet too precise. And yet he pushed forward. Command wouldn't forgive hesitation based on the intuition of an observer. The burden of leadership often demanded silence, not just from subordinates, but from doubts gnawing inside the leader himself. He buried it and advanced. This moment shows a truth beyond any firefight: the risk of dismissing specialists. History proves it. Engineers warning of the Challenger's O-rings, or analysts in Iraq spotting IED patterns. Ignored until it was too late. Ilara Voss was no different. To the SEALs, dead weight. To Monroe, a distraction. Yet she read the ground with lived experience, not theory. Her warning went unheard, but the jungle would soon prove she had been the only one truly prepared. The team pressed deeper, every step pulling them closer to the kill zone. The vines brushed shoulders, roots threatened to snag boots, and the canopy above choked out the moonlight until even their NVGs struggled. Monroe's gut twisted with every yard gained. Behind him, Ilara Voss said nothing more. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply watched, calculating, waiting for the inevitable. Because she knew the jungle wasn't empty. It was a stage, and the curtain was about to rise. The trail funneled them toward a limestone clearing, narrow walls rising on three sides, the jungle thinning overhead just enough to let in a shaft of moonlight. To a casual eye, it looked like the perfect place to pause, to regroup. To Monroe, it felt staged, too neat, too exposed. His instincts screamed, but before he could give an order, the night erupted. The first burst of gunfire shattered the silence, muzzle flashes strobing from the ridgeline above. Bullets chewed stone and sparked against rock, ricochets hissing past ears. The SEALs hit the ground instinctively, but they were already boxed in. Four separate firing positions, overlapping arcs, professional spacing. Contact left, contact right, Monroe roared, though the warning was pointless. Every man already knew they were in a kill zone. Sanchez dove behind a rock, returning fire in short bursts. Collins cursed as his rifle jammed, slamming the side of the weapon with frantic urgency. Chu tried to flank, only to be driven back by disciplined machine gun fire that sprayed dirt into his face. Monroe felt the situation compress like a vice. Their comms were dead, their ammo draining with every exchange, and the enemy held the high ground. The kill zone wasn't a firefight, it was an execution. And then came the scream. Sanchez, their point man, jerked back as a round tore through his shoulder. Blood sprayed across limestone, his rifle clattering from numb fingers. Monroe moved without thinking, dragging him behind cover, but the wound was ugly, deep, pumping with each heartbeat. "Corman!" he shouted reflexively, then cursed. They hadn't brought a medic. This mission wasn't supposed to involve contact, but someone was already moving. Ilara Voss slid into position beside him, calm where everyone else was chaos. Without hesitation, she tore open Sanchez's vest, applied pressure, and produced a bandage from her pack. Her hands worked fast, efficient, not the fumbling of someone reading instructions, but the muscle memory of someone who had done this before under worse conditions. Bullets screamed overhead, chips of stone stinging Monroe's cheek, but she never flinched. "He'll live if you keep pressure here," she said flatly, guiding Monroe's hand before grabbing her pack and scanning the ridge with eyes too calm for the storm around them. It was the first time the SEALs looked at her differently. Still, the situation was dire. Their firepower couldn't match the ambush. Every burst they sent upward was answered by three more, the enemy controlling tempo and position. The flare in Monroe's vest pocket felt heavier than ever, the signal of last resort. To fire it was to admit they were out of options, to invite both rescue and more enemy fire. And yet what choice did he have? He ripped it free, struck the cap, and sent orange fire screaming into the night sky. The jungle lit in harsh shadows, the canopy glowing like a false dawn. For a heartbeat, the mercenaries slowed their fire, as if mocking the desperation of the Americans. Then they redoubled it, bullets hammering the limestone walls with renewed fury. The SEALs pressed tighter to cover, eyes wide, chests heaving. Desperation dripped off every breath. They were running out of ammunition, out of time, and out of blood. This was the crucible of command, the moment when training collides with chaos, when no plan survives contact. For Monroe, every decision carried weight. Push forward and lose men, stay put and bleed out, or gamble everything on a miracle that might not come. Leadership in crisis isn't about heroics. It's about living with impossible trade-offs. And Monroe knew the cost of ignoring the insight they'd dismissed earlier. Ilara Voss had warned them. She had read the ground, and he had chosen to push on anyway. Now one of his men bled in the dirt, another's rifle was out of action, and the jungle that had seemed quiet before now roared with the sound of enemies who knew exactly where to aim. The human cost of arrogance was no longer theoretical. It was written in blood on limestone rock. The firefight stretched into long minutes that felt like hours. Sweat poured under body armor, breath came ragged, magazines ran dry. One by one, the SEALs checked their remaining rounds and exchanged grim looks. 2 mags left. Down to my last 30. Make 'em count. Every man knew what it meant. They weren't going to outlast this ambush. Monroe tried to calculate options, but each path ended in death. He glanced at Ilara. She wasn't firing wildly like the others. She wasn't even aiming her pistol. She was studying, counting, measuring angles, her face calm where theirs was taut with panic. It struck him then. She wasn't waiting for rescue. She was preparing for something else entirely. Moments like these lay bare the fragility of human decision-making. The SEALs weren't inexperienced. They were some of the best trained soldiers in the world. But even elite units can be undone by arrogance, by ignoring a voice that doesn't fit their hierarchy. Leadership under fire isn't only about issuing orders, it's about listening. And Monroe hadn't listened. The human cost wasn't abstract. It was Sanchez bleeding into the mud, Collins shouting at a jammed rifle, and 7 men staring into the abyss of a kill zone designed for them. History reminds us, the first casualty of arrogance is always lives. Pinned, battered, and desperate, the SEALs clung to cover as the orange glow of the flare bled across the treetops. It was their cry for angels, their final admission of helplessness. But no helicopter descended. No salvation came from above. Something else moved in the shadows instead. Alara Voss rose, eyes fixed on the ridgeline, and for the first time, Monroe realized she wasn't an observer at all. She was something far more dangerous. The flare arced skyward in a burning scream, orange fire tearing open the jungle night. For a moment, the canopy glowed as if lit by a second sun, shadows thrown wide across limestone walls, the flare's light painting every desperate face below. For soldiers, firing an SOS was more than a signal. It was an admission. We are finished. We cannot hold. In training manuals, it was listed as final resort. In reality, it meant vulnerability made visible for friend and foe alike. The mercenaries understood. Their gunfire, paused for a single heartbeat, came back with cruel intensity. The flare above was not salvation. It was a target. Bullets rattled stone. Dirt burst in fountains, and the kill zone grew smaller with every passing second. Monroe's chest heaved. He felt the weight of command pressing into his ribs, every choice bleeding men dry. Sanchez was propped against rock, pale beneath his bandages. Collins' rifle was working again, but his ammunition was nearly gone. Chu gritted his teeth, firing in short bursts. But even he knew they couldn't win this firefight. And then there was Alara Voss, Specter 9, moving through the chaos with the composure of someone untouched by panic. She had already proven herself as battlefield medic, saving Sanchez when no one else could. Her hands had been steady even as bullets screamed overhead, her voice calm while others shouted and cursed. But now she shifted again, in a way none of the SEALs could have predicted. She reached up to her pack, unclipping the hard case strapped between her shoulders. From it, she drew a weapon no one had noticed until that moment. Not a standard-issue rifle, not even a piece of gear that matched SEAL supply lines. It was lean, worn, modified beyond recognition, an operator's weapon, but one carried by someone who needed nothing but precision. Monroe's breath caught as he recognized it for what it was. A suppressed sniper rifle, compact but deadly, the kind of tool only a handful of specialists on Earth could wield with mastery. She didn't announce her intent. She didn't boast. She simply checked the chamber, adjusted the optics with practiced familiarity, and slipped into the shadows without a sound. "Where the hell is she going?" Collins hissed, half in disbelief, half in awe. Monroe didn't answer. He only watched her vanish into the green-black walls of jungle, moving as if the vines themselves bent to let her pass. Minutes stretched. Gunfire thundered from the ridges, echoing off stone like rolling drums of doom. The SEALs clung to cover, returning what fire they could, but morale had cratered. The flare's glow dimmed, its smoke curling above like a taunt. No angels are coming. Then came a sound unlike the others, a single suppressed crack, soft but sharp, like a whisper cutting the night. From the western ridge, one muzzle flash died. The SEALs froze, confusion written across their faces. Another crack, different angle, different range. A second enemy position went quiet. The mercenaries' disciplined crossfire faltered, panic leaking into their shouts. They had been the hunters, but suddenly they were being stalked by something they couldn't see. Monroe counted in silence. 1 shot, 2, then 3. Each echo came from a different place, as if the shooter moved between shadows with impossible speed. The men began to whisper it aloud, voices trembling. "It's her! It's Specter 9! By the 4th shot, the firing line had collapsed into chaos. Mercenaries broke formation, shouting, scrambling for cover against an enemy they couldn't locate. And then, after the 5th shot, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. The kill zone had been consumed. The SEALs, still crouched in mud and blood, stared wide-eyed at each other. 5 shots, 5 kills, each impossibly precise. Ilara Voss re-emerged as quietly as she had disappeared, her rifle slung casually across her chest. Her pale eyes scanned the clearing, not with triumph, but with assessment, like a craftsman checking finished work. She returned to Sanchez, examined his bandage, adjusted the pressure. Monroe wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who trained her? Why had she been sent as observer? But none made it past his lips. She was already repacking her gear, preparing as though this had been routine. She hadn't saved them for glory. She had simply done what needed to be done. The flare carried a clear symbol. To the SEALs, it was a desperate plea. To the mercenaries, a sign of weakness. Yet it also became a spotlight for revelation. Specter Nine, once dismissed as baggage, proved silence could be power. The flare exposed their vulnerability, but the shadows revealed her strength. Competence doesn't shout, it waits. The SEALs had cried surrender. Specter Nine answered with precision. One meant helplessness, the other mastery. Together they changed the night. When the jungle grew quiet again, the flare's glow finally faded, leaving only the acrid smell of smoke and cordite. The SEALs shifted uneasily, their eyes drifting toward Ilara Voss, not with dismissal, but with reverence tinged with fear. They had come into the jungle expecting to lead. Instead, they had been led by a ghost. And for the first time, Monroe admitted to himself what he already knew. Their survival hadn't come from angels in the sky. It had come from the shadows, from Specter Nine. The clearing was chaos moments before. Muzzle flashes tearing the night, ricochets sparking stone, men pinned in mud and blood. Then came the first suppressed crack. It wasn't loud. It didn't roar like the mercenaries' machine guns or thunder like the SEALs' rifles. It whispered, a sound barely there, easily dismissed, except for what followed. A mercenary tumbling backward from the ridgeline, his weapon slipping from lifeless fingers. The crossfire staggered. The first position was gone. Monroe's eyes widened. He had fought in jungles across the globe, but he had never seen someone vanish into shadows and then reappear only as consequence. He didn't need to ask who fired that shot. Every man in the kill zone knew. Specter Nine. The second shot. The mercenaries shouted orders, trying to hold formation. They shifted, covering the gap left by their fallen comrade. Then the second crack broke the air. Again soft, again lethal. This time a machine gunner pitched forward, body slamming the rock he had braced against. His weapon fell silent. The drum of suppression cut mid-beat. For the SEALs, it was oxygen. Heads lifted. For the mercenaries, it was dread. Chu whispered, almost reverent. She's moving. And she was. The angles were impossible otherwise. No sniper could fire from 2 points so quickly, yet somehow she did. The SEALs searched for her silhouette and found nothing. Only darkness shifting where no human could be. The third shot by now, panic gnawed at the mercenaries' discipline. They fired blindly into the jungle, convinced ghosts moved in the trees. Their shouts in unfamiliar tongues betrayed fear more than command. The third shot came from a completely different angle. A team leader collapsed, his chest blooming red under flare light. His men faltered, torn between retreat and retaliation. Monroe felt something stir inside him. Not relief, not yet, but the realization of witnessing mastery. This wasn't luck. This was orchestration. The jungle was her instrument, and she played it with silence and patience. Sanchez, pale but conscious against the rock, whispered hoarsely, "That's not an observer. That's death walking." The fourth shot time slowed with the fourth round. A mercenary scrambled to reposition, shouting for his comrades. The crack came, and his body folded mid-stride, collapsing into vines. Now panic fully replaced confidence. Their crossfire disintegrated. What had been a trap designed for precision devolved into chaos. The mercenaries shouted at each other, firing into empty darkness, no longer sure where the threat even was. The SEALs, bloodied, exhausted, nearly broken, found themselves watching, not fighting. They weren't participants anymore. They were witnesses to something they could barely comprehend. Collins muttered, voice trembling. I can't even see her. Good, Monroe answered, though his own voice was low with awe. Neither can they. The fifth shot, silence stretched a beat too long. The mercenaries hesitated, regrouping, perhaps daring to hope they had survived the invisible storm. Then came the fifth and final whisper. It was almost delicate, as if the jungle itself sighed, and with it, the last command position crumbled. The leader fell, head snapping back, his weapon clattering uselessly to the dirt. The mercenaries froze, then broke. Boots crashed through undergrowth, retreating in every direction, the discipline of moments before dissolving into primal terror. The jungle swallowed them whole, their panic fading into distance until only the acrid tang of cordite and blood remained. 5 shots, 5 kills, no misses. The SEALs stayed crouched in silence. For long seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if they feared breaking the spell. Then Monroe straightened slowly, scanning the ridges. Nothing. No movement, no silhouette. Only the bodies left behind. Mercenaries who had thought themselves predators, now sprawled like offerings to the darkness. And then she returned. Specter 9 emerged from the tree line without ceremony, rifle slung across her chest, expression unreadable. She moved to Sanchez first, checking his wound, adjusting the bandage. To her, the firefight was over. To the SEALs, it had been revelation. Collins stared openly. His earlier skepticism burned away. Chu whispered, 5 shots. Just 5. Monroe said nothing. He only watched her, realizing that they hadn't just been saved. They had been shown a standard far beyond their own. This is how legends are born, not in speeches, not in medals, but in silence. 5 shots whispered into the night did more than save lives. They rewrote perception. The SEALs, elite warriors trained to believe they were the sharpest edge of the spear, found themselves in awe of someone they had dismissed hours earlier. In their world, credibility was measured in weapons carried and missions logged. Ilara Voss carried neither, yet when the moment came, she carried all of them. History is full of such figures. The nurse who kept men alive under impossible fire, the codebreaker whose silence shortened wars, the scout whose warnings went unheeded until proven right. Their legends didn't need parades. They were written in the hushed voices of survivors. Specter Nine's legend began in those 5 shots. No speeches, no announcements. Just competence so sharp it cut through disbelief. The SEALs would retell this night not as their own survival, but as the night they witnessed silence turn into salvation. The flare above burned out, its glow fading into smoke. The jungle was dark again, but the SEALs no longer feared the shadows, because they knew who lived there, and they would never forget. The jungle was silent now, unnaturally so. Smoke drifted from the ridges, where the mercenaries had once fired with precision. Now there were only 5 still forms left behind, each one felled by a single surgical shot. Specter 9 stepped from the shadows like she had always been there, moving with no urgency, no visible triumph. Her rifle hung across her chest, worn steel catching the faint glow of the dying flare. She didn't look at the bodies, didn't bask in awe. She simply returned to the SEALs as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Her first stop was Sanchez. He was pale, his bandage soaked but breathing. She knelt, checked the wound, adjusted pressure, and nodded once to Monroe. He'll make it if he stays stable. No drama, no reassurance, just facts, delivered in the same level tone she'd used when warning them hours before. Collins, who had mocked her most, couldn't take his eyes off the rifle slung at her side. The modifications, the wear, the quiet proof of experience none of them had recognized. Chu whispered, all clean kills. I counted. But Ilara didn't answer. Instead, she stood, scanned the perimeter one last time, and shouldered her pack. Monroe stepped forward. You're not coming with us, are you? She met his eyes, expression unreadable. Different extraction, different orders. What orders? He pressed. Ones you don't need to know. And with that, she turned. No farewell, no salute, just a deliberate walk into the same jungle that had swallowed her before. Within seconds, she was gone, the darkness closing behind her as though she had never existed. Moments later, the thunder of rotor blades split the silence. The extraction bird descended in a wash of wind and debris, the crew chief shouting for casualties. The SEALs lifted Sanchez aboard, still glancing back toward the trees, half expecting her to reappear. She never did. Monroe climbed into the helicopter last. As the jungle shrank beneath him, he reached into his pocket. His hand closed around the single brass casing he'd found in the mud. One of her shots. He held it like proof, like an artifact of a ghost. He already knew how he would write the after-action report. Unknown sniper provided covering fire. Details classified, pending further investigation. But in his heart, the truth was clear. Specter Nine was the archetype of the unsung hero. The quiet professional whose competence outweighed recognition. She hadn't stayed for thanks, hadn't explained who she was, hadn't claimed command. She had simply acted when the moment demanded. In military culture, legends are often built around loud victories, medals, speeches, but the truest legends rarely speak for themselves. They walk away, leaving only questions, fragments, and the awe of those who witnessed. That night, the SEALs left the jungle alive, carrying scars, stories, and one brass casing. And they carried something else too, the knowledge that when everything failed, salvation came not from above, but from the shadows, from Specter Nine. When the smoke cleared and the flare's glow faded, what remained wasn't just a battlefield story, it was a lesson. Specter Nine showed us that strength doesn't always wear rank or speak the loudest. Sometimes the quiet professional, the one overlooked or dismissed, is the person who changes everything. That message reaches beyond the jungle. In today's world, how often do we ignore the quiet voice in the meeting, the elder with lived experience, or the colleague who sees what others miss? American culture often celebrates boldness, but this story reminds us that competence in silence can be just as powerful, sometimes even more so. And perhaps that's the heart of it. Legends aren't only forged on battlefields. They're made in hospitals, in classrooms, in communities, anywhere someone steps forward, not for recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. But here's the open question. What makes a legend? Is it skill? Is it courage? Or is it the ability to act without needing the world's applause? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what you think defines a true hero in our modern world. Do you believe America still values the quiet professionals among us? Or have we grown too focused on those who shout the loudest? Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it spoke to you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in hidden strength. Every story we tell together becomes part of a larger conversation, and I can't wait to read what you'll add to it.